Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be getting uncomfortably close to the camera, apparently. I'm going to be reading from my book, Ruin, by me, Clarence Carter, published by Stephanie James Publishing. Get comfortable. Chapter 1. Baby Bobby's shrill cry broke me from an unrestful sleep. I sat up, scraping the crust from my eyes. Surprisingly, Beverly hadn't woke too. The aches and pains of my early 40s settled in. Each shriek pulsed in my ears, wanting to get to him before he woke her. I rushed across the floor and lifted him from the crib. All right, all right. Before leaving the room, I glanced over my shoulder to assure she hadn't woken too. Her eyes still closed, mouth partially open, and red, fiery hair sprang across her pillow in all directions like a frantic string mop after a 72-hour penthouse party. Descending the stairs, I cooed at the baby, rocking him. He protested, judging by the smell permeating from his diaper. He wanted more than just a bottle. Downstairs, I grabbed the bag and hit the power button on the remote. The TV came to life, broadcasting the 7 o'clock news. I hadn't thought of checking the clock. A blonde woman took over the screen as I laid the new diaper on the changing table. We're coming to you live just outside of Old Pine Valley, where local authorities have discovered a cave. Currently, we're awaiting the experts for further information. Here with us is the policeman who discovered it. Officer Dugan, what did you see inside? The cop groaned. There were drawings on the walls. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill graffiti. This looked like something older. I don't dare speculate on who or what may have put them there. The woman glanced at the camera. Like hieroglyphs? He agreed. Yeah, hieroglyphs. All I know is this wasn't punk teenagers. The blonde asked, how did you come across this cave? We've been combing these woods in search of the missing girl, Darla Reynolds. My partner and I were searching through this passage. I can confirm that she's not in there. We've been thorough with our search. The blonde nodded. Thank you so much for keeping Old Pine safe, and I hope you find Darla soon. Back to you, Michael. Pulling the strap closed on the new diaper, I poked Bobby's belly. He'd stopped crying momentarily. It had less to do with the commotion than contentment. What do you say we get breakfast going, huh, little guy? At that, he made no protest. He slid into the high chair with ease. As I turned my back to grab a bottle from the fridge, I caught a glimpse of the honey-do list. That's when I saw my wife's scrawled letters about interviewing nannies. There were 3 of them who had applied for the position. Oh, right. I almost forgot about that, I muttered, holding the bottle out. He latched on quickly. Just between the 2 of us, I don't know how I feel about having a stranger living here. I wish your mommy hadn't advertised it as a live-in position. A voice arose from the doorway. I don't know who else you expect it to work. How else you expect it to work, Robert? I'm not giving up my career. You're certainly not giving up yours. If we hired help, the poor girl would be coming and going at all hours. It makes more sense to have a full-time nanny than a traveling one. Unlike Beverly, I didn't grow up with a nanny. My parents, David and Cynthia, went without several things. That's why I was so desperate to get my soccer ball back from the Wilburns' house all those years ago. I had begged for a new ball for nearly a year before I finally got it on my 13th birthday. Dad worked long hours as a paralegal before becoming a lawyer, just to assure Mom could stay home with Raya and me. I didn't acknowledge it then, but later looked back at the sacrifices he made. I guess that's why I followed in his footsteps, going to school at night while working at the quarry before finally earning my law degree. Straightening my back, I said, I didn't see you there. She smiled. That's okay. You're going to have to trust me, all right? You'll be glad they're here. You'll thank me. I doubted that. I wouldn't ever say it aloud, but I now regretted that I had agreed to her starting at the network. I wanted more of a family life, like the one I was raised in, but Bev was determined to have the best of both worlds, her career and a family. I had even voiced the idea of having Rhea move back in to help with Bobby until he started kindergarten. Bev put that idea to rest as well, and said Ray didn't need distractions while at school. So that leaves me in the present, staring at a nanny for hire ad. I slid the thin blanket from the large birdcage, bringing George out of his hibernation. As I did, the sun came through the bay window, highlighting the red, yellow, and blue feathers of George, Bev's macaw parrot. She had the bird before we had met. I had to admit, I had never been fond of the loud avian, but I did enjoy seeing the gorgeous colors as I paced back and forth along the horizontal dowel. I washed my hands as it spread its wings to bask in the sun. The coffee pot gurgled to life as I placed a small pan on the stove and cracked some eggs. Did you see that thing on the news? She pulled the coffee mug from the cabinet. What thing? She sat down at the chessboard that we now used as a breakfast table. We had received it from Grandma Claire as a wedding gift, but as our careers took off, and now with Bobby, we rarely pulled the pieces out to play. They made a discovery of some ruins in a cave. She scoffed. Ruins? Like what? Ancient Egyptians? Cave people, probably. Still, that's an interesting discover for our sleepy nowhere town. She agreed. Oh, yeah. She swallowed with her finger in my direction. Don't forget the first interview will be here at 9. I scheduled them all about half an hour apart, so don't go telling them any of your courtroom war stories there, John Grisham. Ha! Ha! George mimicked loudly from his cage. I set Bev's plate before her on the chessboard table and kissed the top of her head. One of the things I loved most about her was that she didn't pull any punches. She didn't hide how she felt, which made our relationship easier and harder simultaneously. Sitting down, I added, hopefully there won't be too many more war stories. Once I get elected, I'll stop practicing law so quickly they'll put up missing posters in the office. Bobby giggled. I pointed to him in surprise. See that? I already have one vote. In between bites of egg, she said, if you get elected, with a smirk. Gilligan made her way out from our bedroom. She ducked her head beneath the tablecloth, making it easy for me to sneak her a corner piece of crust from my toast. Apparently, though, not sneaky enough. Robert, Bev said in her tone that meant we had been caught. No table scraps. It's not healthy for her. Yeah, I replied in an effort to avoid an argument. Gilligan's gnarled tail stub wagged excitedly as I rubbed her head and down to her back. I had found Gilligan before I had even met Beverly, nearly 20 years ago. She had been banging out near she had been hanging out near an open irrigation pipe. With a little encouragement, using my fast food hamburger as bribery, I was able to coerce her into becoming a member of my family, and now our family. There was no use explaining this to Bev, but if Gilligan had found an immunity to aging, I had little doubt a piece of 7 whole grain crust was a worry of hers. After breakfast, I started chores. I continued stealing glances at the TV, hoping for a follow up story. It had genuinely caught my attention, and I wanted to know what would come of it. Rather than covering that, they did a monologue about gas prices and foreign policies controlling the market. Before I knew it, the first of our applicants rang the doorbell. I grabbed my namesake and wandered to the front door. Gilligan raced me, as she always had to be the first to greet our guests. Unlike most dogs, she didn't bark much, which was nice, but she always stood in the way, making it a struggle to open the door. An older woman holding the newspaper adjusted her glasses to see the page more clearly. She looked surprised when I opened it. Is this 712 Vine Street? I gave her a half smile. Yes, it is. Are you here for the nanny position? She nodded. The other thing that made me uncomfortable was that Beverly hadn't given any information about our applicants, not even their names. Thankfully, years of defending people had given me a handful of social skills. Before stepping inside, she stopped. She grabbed onto the wall and hoisted one leg up with a grimace. Using my free hand, I helped her. Accident back in '98. Bad hip, she said, waddling inside. Sorry to hear that, I said, matching her pace. Gilligan also seemed to pick up on her slight disability and gave her room to walk. With the flick of a button, the TV went black. I knew if I didn't turn it off, I wouldn't be able to pay attention to the interview. I was unsure about the curious draw this discovery had on me, and why pushing the power button was almost painful. Turning it off made me uneasy about the updates, and I reminded myself that I could check it out online. Even before we began, I had my doubts. her age and mobility would be an issue. It wouldn't be long before Bobby turned into a toddler, and I wondered if she could chase him around, or heaven forbid, get to him before he got into the road. These concerns plagued me throughout the interview and eventually sealed her fate. I thanked her for coming and helped her down the step, but I didn't mention any follow up interviews, and she didn't ask. Perhaps she'd assumed I'd call. During our break, I took the small plastic bag from the standalone cupboard behind George's cage and filled his metal bowl with the familiar brown pellets. He caught a few times and ruffled his feathers before taking one into the tip of his black beak. I took his matching water bowl, rinsed it out, and replaced it with fresh water, then did the same to Gilligan's with a rubber non-slip base. "Here you go, girl," followed by two pats to her mid-back. The second woman wasn't much better. What she had in youth and vitality, she lacked in hygiene and manners. At one point during the interview, I wondered if I'd have to burn my couch because I didn't think Febreze would cover the stench. Gilligan even seemed to scrunch up her maw before letting out an abrupt sneeze, an uncontrolled way to dispel the smell from her nostrils. I ended it quickly, pretending to be busy and promising to call if I chose her. While waiting for the third interview, I turned on the TV. The expert stood in the frame, just before the mouth of the cave. Seismic activity along one of the fault lines could have exposed this cave. The reporter nodded, holding the mic before him. Also, one of the more interesting features that we've discovered about this cave isn't just the artwork. We've discovered human footprints captured in clay. They're slender, which leads us to believe that they may have been a woman or young adult. Weather may have played a crucial role in their preservation. The doorbell rang. Shutting off the TV, I got up from my seat and wandered to the door where my final contestant awaited. When I opened it, I didn't acknowledge the ease, not realizing it was from the lack of having to push Gilligan aside. I thought Bev had played a prank on me. The woman standing at the door looked nearly identical to her. If not for a thinner nose and slightly bigger ears, they might have been indistinguishable. I couldn't believe my eyes. Clearing my throat, I said, "I'm sorry to stare, it's just that you look so much like my wife." That was chapter 1. Hold on just a second. My office does not breathe very well. It's really hot in here. Chapter 2. Stepping aside, I let her in. She introduced herself as Felicia Wood as she approached the couch. It felt like something out of the Twilight Zone, and focusing on the interview proved difficult. The whole time, I wanted to call upstairs to let Beverly see her twin. Making her feel like a sideshow act stopped me. The bird cawed. "Your move, your move." I chuckled. Ignore him. George has gotten quite opinionated in his old age. It felt like a hallucination, like I was seeing my wife 10 years younger with some light plastic surgery. It made me wonder if they were related. Felicia lifted Bobby off the couch and held him. He cooed, reached out his hands, and grasped her red hair. "This is the little guy that we'll need help with. As you can see, he's a handful." Even as I spoke, I stole glances at the stairs, hoping she'd walk down and see for herself. But instead, I saw Gilligan peering out from the bedroom's cracked door. In the dark, I could mainly just see the reflection of her eyes. I instantly got distracted as Bobby grabbed Felicia's red hair, and I assisted in removing it from the baby's grip. I caught a whiff of her, not an unpleasant one. Unlike most women, she didn't smell of perfume or soap. Felicia smelled of the woods, of grass, and earth. I wondered if she'd been gardening before the interview, although her clothes weren't dirty. Bobby settled in her arms. It didn't take long before he drifted off to sleep. She looked like a natural with a baby in her hands, and I wondered if she had any children of her own. I doubted she did. We carried on with formalities, although I caught myself stumbling. There were questions I'd start and then lose. I couldn't believe my eyes. Still, "I'm sorry, I'm just a bit scatterbrained this morning." This made her smile. "No need to apologize. Babies can keep you up at all hours of the night." She wasn't wrong. It had been a few nights since he'd kept me up late, although he did have a habit of getting me up before my alarm clock in the mornings. The conversation had dulled. She wasn't the most talkative woman I'd ever met, which made the interview a bit more complicated. There were a few questions about her work history that she didn't really expand upon. Eventually, Beverly came downstairs. When she saw Felicia, she stopped in her tracks. Her mouth hung open. They didn't say anything at first, only stared. Even they saw it in one another. A chuckle escaped Felicia's lips. I guess you were right. We do look a bit alike. Still in shock, Beverly approached. It's like looking into a mirror. If the mirror had been hung in her college dorm, I thought, but didn't say. They were both beautiful women, but Beverly looked more mature. Crow's feet had started in the corners of her eyes, and frown lines creased her face. Gray poked through her blanket of straight hair. From there, Bev didn't seem to care about the interview or the position. She only cared about their uncanny resemblance. She asked Felicia several questions, specifically about her family. She dug deep, trying to find a connection, but couldn't. They weren't related, as far as either of them could tell. It happens sometimes, Felicia said. People look alike. Felicia was a bit more dismissive about the whole thing than Beverly. She said she'd come from a military family and moved around a lot, which made it even more unlikely that they were related. At first, Felicia seemed flattered. By the end of it, she didn't seem to care. She tried getting the conversation back on track. During the Inquisition, Bobby awoke. She took the binky from the table and settled him in yet again, but not before asking about his feeding schedule. He eats about every 3 hours, except he gets fussy when it comes to the end of the night. Sometimes he won't take the bottle at all past 6 o'clock. With the baby still in the crook of her arm, she nodded. And naps? The comfort with which they spoke to each other was interesting to me. It didn't surprise me at all that they were speaking as if she'd already got the job. Believe me, he'll let you know when it's time. At this, they both chuckled. She seemed like a nice girl, even though something about her timing seemed off. When asked a question, she took a few extra seconds to respond, as if she were digging through 10 answers for the right one. I wondered if she might be careful about her responses, or perhaps she was on the spectrum. I didn't know if it was a trait that I'd picked up as a lawyer. I wasn't even sure that other people would notice because of how brief it was. Once asleep, she placed him on the couch. There, she whispered. Her eyes were the same greenish blue as Beverly's, and they looked just as quizzical. I'm very interested in this position, she said, brushing her hair off her shoulder. By far, she'd been the best candidate. I still intended on doing a background check and calling her references. There were still T's to cross and I's to dot. You're hired, Bev said. Just like that, we had our nanny. I had to stop myself from looking at her and making a face. On our way to the door, I said, You can start whenever it's convenient. The pay was in the posting, so you already know about that. Thank you so much, she said, extending her hand. You have a lovely family. Thank you, I said, closing the door behind her. Beverly looked timid. When I was certain Felicia wasn't within listening distance, I spoke. We really should have done the background check on her. She rocked Bobby in her arms. Sorry, I just got excited. She's the one. I can feel it. Bev wasn't as concerned about such affairs as I was, considering all that had gone on in my life. I'd even considered myself a touch paranoid. She was much better than the other candidates, but I didn't plan on hiring her on the spot. I wanted to make sure that she had a decent work history. Ask her former employers why she didn't work there anymore, just to make sure she wasn't a thief or anything. Bev gave me an assuring smile. You're always so worried. Relax. Trust me. Years of working around criminals had given me a poor outlook on life. I'd seen some horrible things, crime scene photos that would make some people vomit. I'd also been through my own share of hardships, being kidnapped by Jack Wilburn, having Brad turned into a garden gnome, and eventually killing Wilburn in a fire when his house burned down. Only a few days separated us from Felicia moving in. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in my study, flicking through legal documents and sipping brandy. I decided to search for her on social media. I would have given It would have given me a glimpse into her life. I ran her name through the search bar. A handful of Felicia Woods came back, but none looked like her. One without a profile picture remained. It had been inactive for years, and the few posts were all religious texts and follow chains. Looking over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of my mom's chessboard sitting behind me on the fireplace hearth, like the one in the dining room. It had been too long since I'd played, and I considered setting up the pieces just because. I missed the 2 years Bev and I had been dating. She had come to every one of my weekly chess classes at the library. That was years ago, before we went to school, before I became a paralegal, then a partner at the law firm. And now, with me throwing my hat into politics, I doubt I'd ever have time again. I leaned over the corner of the couch arm and moved a white pawn. It was probably for the best. After Bev and I married, I would often get repetitive nightmares of the suffering that had happened before, and I reconsidered arranging the pieces in the correct positions. As I pulled my hand back from the piece, I saw the spine of one of the books on the bookcase. It was a thin black book that had a green reflection shimmer down its length. It was the book Rhea had left behind when she had been staying in our spare room after Mom had died. Bev brought it out and put it in our bookshelf after she left for the dorm until she would return. Gilligan stood up, eyeing the book, looking down her nose like the iron sight of a rifle. A low growl rumbled from her chest, and the stub of her gnarled tail erect at an upward angle. Just the light, I thought. A phone call to Bev's mother didn't shed light on their similarities. Tilly didn't know any of the family members named Felicia and didn't have any other kids besides Beverly. None that she'd put up for adoption or anything of the sort. Quite the opposite. She'd had a hard time conceiving Beverly and wasn't able to have another. Broadening my search, I checked Google. I flicked through pages, hoping to find a yearbook photo of an article about sports accomplishments. I even specified the area, hoping it would narrow the results. But 2 hours of searching accomplished nothing. My first thought was that she belonged to a religious family that didn't approve of social media. I even considered that the page I'd found might have been hers when she'd been younger. Then, as an adult, she just never returned. She lived outside the scope of the internet, which didn't seem possible anymore. Polishing off my brandy, I retreated to the bedroom, followed by Gilligan. Felicia's absence online surprised me. It seemed like people, especially younger ones like herself, lived online. The private investigators we hired through the firm could find anything online. They rarely had to knock on doors like in the old days. Not long after lying down, a horrendous nightmare took me. The piercing shriek of a native tribe broke the silence. Coming to, I looked around, seeing large fields and movement in the distance. The stomping of horse hooves grew louder as they drew closer. Arrows struck the ground around me. My heart thundered. I tried to run, but fell instead. Before I knew it, they surrounded me. I awoke with a jolt, gasping for air. Sweat trickled from my forehead. Searching my mind, I tried to determine where the dream might have come from. I wondered if I'd seen or heard something on TV. Nothing rang any bells. For a long time I stared at the ceiling, trying to soothe myself. Part of me even hoped the baby would wake up so I had something to do, something to distract myself. Eventually, sleep returned. The following day I sat behind my desk surrounded by paperwork, even up to my knees in litigation, and looking down the barrel of a huge trial. I couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious woman moving into my house. Something still didn't feel right. For some peace of mind, I called Nancy, one of the PIs our firm used, a brilliant woman with a knack for finding things that were never meant to be found. The phone rang a few times. Robert, how can I help you? Nance, I was hoping you could look into something for me. Sure. What am I looking for? I paused. That's just it. I'm not sure. Anything you can find. She paused. This wasn't this this wasn't how we did things. This must have raised a flag. Oh, so unofficially? I agreed. Don't make too much noise when you're looking. She's my nanny, just trying to be safe for Junior, you know? I understand. How's the family doing anyway? Bobby must be growing like a weed. You have no idea. Everybody's good, hoping to keep it that way. I gave her what little information I had. If anybody could dig up dirt on her, it would be Nancy. I'll see what I can do. Get back to you when I find something. Thanks, Nance. A little wave of relief washed over me. There were a lot of things I could forgive. If Nancy uncovered a DUI or something, if it wasn't a pattern, I could forgive that. People make mistakes. I just wanted to be safe. Flipping through the files, I found it difficult to focus. Between the nightmare and Felicia moving in so quickly, my mind was off to the races. As I continued reading the case file, I figured out where the nightmare had come from. A massive real estate company had acquired land believed to be a native burial ground. They wanted to turn it into an apartment complex. They'd come to our firm to cut through all the red tape. There were a few people at the firm with a focus on real estate law, which wasn't my area of expertise. I helped with some of the filings and the other basics, but not much. On my drive home, I considered the dream further and tried connecting it to the cave story. Clearly, there'd been a few things on my mind that led to that dream. Living so close to Navajo Nation played a factor in it too, certainly. The house smelled of cookies by the time I got home. Beverly busied herself in the kitchen, even though she was a decent cook. She didn't do much baking. We usually went to the bakery down the street. Pulling off my blazer and placing it on the back of the chair, I asked, "What's going on in here?" She pulled the oven mitt off and placed it on the counter. "I'm just trying to make a good impression, is all." I kissed the top of Bobby's head as he drooled in his high chair. His bottle lay on its side in front of him. Grabbing my wife by the waist, I pulled her into me. "You look adorable in that apron." "Is that so?" she asked, flushing. We kissed. Our intimate life had been obstructed by our newborn. Whenever we intended to do the deed, we were either too exhausted or the baby cried, ruining the moment. It had been a while since we'd been together. My hand slid down her backside. Before anything could happen, the doorbell rang, setting the bird off in a fit. "Doorbell," George screeched. I rolled my eyes, not at all surprised. When it came to romance, we had the worst luck. She pulled away slightly. "Could you get that, honey? Maybe we'll pick this up later?" I wandered to the door, unimpressed. On the other side, Felicia stood smiling. We'd expected her, but I didn't think she'd return until later. She had one canvas bag of clothes. I looked over her shoulder, expecting a moving truck, a car, or something. Nothing. I found this strange, too, but I considered that she might be moving her things slowly over the course of the next couple of weeks. Without a word, I allowed her inside and pointed her upstairs to the spare bedroom. Things were moving a bit fast for my liking, but Beverly seemed smitten. As she went up the stairs, I couldn't help looking at her bag. It looked brand new, as if she'd just pulled it off the rack that morning. Returning to the kitchen, I considered telling Bev about the bag, but I already knew what she'd say. There were a lot of people who didn't drive, people who couldn't afford cars either. These possibilities stifled my conspiracy for the time being. The possibility of a DUI or a suspended license still lingered in my mind, and I knew if there was anything like that, Nancy Edgecombe would find it. That earthly smell followed her. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it reminded me of camping as a kid. Dew, moss, the outdoors. I wondered if she was an avid hiker or something. I intended on asking her questions about the hobbies during the interview, but Beverly had thrown off my plan. Beverly asked me to watch the cookies and the baby as she brushed past me, eager to help Felicia settle. They thumped up the stairs, gossiping. Although I couldn't make out their words, their giggles traveled. Not long after that, the timer went off, and I fetched the cookies from the oven. Bobby didn't seem interested in me or the cookies. He pushed a strawberry around in a puddle of drool. The to-do list still stared back at me from the fridge, incomplete. It reminded me that I needed to water the ficus, which wasn't on the list. She expected me to remember it, which I often didn't. The fact that it hadn't lost all its leaves and shriveled up surprised me. I liked that it was a bit more resilient than other plants that had dried up from my neglect. Briefly, I considered calling Nancy to see if she'd found anything, but I resisted. Instead, I grabbed my phone off the counter and searched for the mysterious ruins. I wondered if they'd found anything else of interest. I even considered driving there to have a look for myself, but figured it would be blocked off to the public. I'd always been a fan of Egyptology and watched documentaries when I could. Flicking through the articles, I found an expert who'd written a piece about the cave's geographical location. He expressed the possibility that a tectonic shift split the rocks apart and displayed the cave that could have been dormant for thousands of years. I scratched my head, wondering how long it had been accessible. I also questioned the lack of earthquakes. If there'd been one, the news either didn't cover it or it had been buried under the other stories. My fingers hovered, ready to search the seismic activity in the area. Their footsteps came first, then their voices. Beverly said, "This is where we'll be taking most of our meals." Seeing them standing side by side unsettled me. They looked so much alike that I thought it wasn't just strange, but impossible. I wasn't an expert, but the odds had to be crazy. They always said that everyone had a doppelganger somewhere, but I'd never heard of them living under the same roof. "It's a very nice kitchen," Felicia said. "And look who we have here," she added, approaching Bobby. I tried to help. "Make yourself comfortable. Take your time adjusting. Moving can be quite taxing." A polite smile crossed her face. "That won't be necessary. I'm ready to start right now." A text message pinged on my phone. "Nancy." She texted to say she hadn't found anything yet, but planned to keep digging. That wasn't what I'd wanted to hear. My fingers ran over the buttons, feeling the wear from a couple of years of frenzied phone calls and text messages. I tapped out my response with a silent groan of disappointment. Felicia stepped past me, grabbed some paper towels from the bar, and approached the high chair. She began cleaning up the strawberry mush Bobby had created. Bev had a flirty look in her eye as she said, "Now that we've got some help around the house, we can pick up date nights again." My mind barely registered the context of this until the moment had passed. My thoughts had been elsewhere. By the time I figured it out, the disappointed look had already crossed her face, and she looked away. When they were settled in, I left them to it. The stairs creaked as I approached my office. The familiar walls surrounded me, bringing forth a sense of comfort. "Oh, hey, girl." Gilligan was lying between my desk and a storage chest. I sat down before my computer screen, entered my password, and the background of our beautiful family came into view. The internet browser opened, followed by Google. There were tons of articles about native graves, but the locations had been lost to time. None of the locals were certain that they were on my client's property. Even if they were, I didn't know there was much they could do to stop it. Our case looked airtight. After pawing around with work for a little while, I searched for Felicia online again, looking through pages and pages of Google results. There were other people in the country with the same name. One of them had been a ballerina. It didn't take long to discover it wasn't the same one. She was only 14 and lived in Dallas. Unsatisfied with my search results, I went back downstairs. The two women were holding Bobby so he could see George on the perch above the cage. I cleared my throat, gaining their attention. "I'm gonna go to the store right quick. Need anything?" Beverly shook her head. Climbing down the front steps, I looked off into the distance where the sun had gone down. A bite lingered in the air. The ruin had called me all day. I routinely checked the web, but they hadn't published anything new. All I could find were speculation pieces and YouTubers touring it. I wondered how I could get there and back without raising too much suspicion. As I thought about my alibi, the car came to life. Even if Beverly did find out, I didn't think she'd do much. She might complain, question my motives, but that's all. Without a plan, I approached the highway. I slid onto the road, considering what I was doing before pressing my accelerator. There were too many questions, too many things unanswered. It called me unlike anything in the media had before. My phone rang, startling me. Looking down at it, I expected Bev. I thought she might have been tracking me, somehow, and laughed at my own paranoia. Nancy's name filled the screen. "Hello?" I asked, rolling up the window so I could hear her over the wind. "Robert, what are you up to?" I considered telling her the truth, that I was headed out to a cave for no reason other than curiosity. "Just hanging around, waiting for an update. That's why I called. I followed all my leads. You've got yourself a genuine ghost. I don't know who she is or where she came from. Thus far, I haven't even figured out where she went to school. I haven't found a birth certificate. Nothing. As much as it unsettled me, I wasn't surprised. Something about her wasn't right. The car came to a stop, and I searched the shadows through the headlight beams. Thanks. That brings me great comfort knowing this ghost lives in my house." On the phone, Nancy sounded much older. "Press her. Get information. Make this search easier for both of us." "All right," I said. "See what I can do." Darkness had taken over by the time I reached the woods. From there, I used my flashlight to illuminate my path. As I went, I checked over my shoulder, cautious that someone might be lurking in the dark. A transient, a cop, someone with ill intentions. I tried imagining how the cave went unnoticed. The thought of it becoming visible because of a tectonic shift seemed unlikely. The plates moved very slowly. I wondered if someone had helped the process along, but I couldn't imagine how or why. After nearly 10 minutes of walking, I found the rocks I'd seen on the news. They weren't a part of a mountain, but a large formation. I stood in front of them, looking to see if I had company. I didn't. The yellow tape that had once surrounded it had been discarded on a tree branch. Something scurried in the woods, startling me. I moved closer, examining the exterior with my light. I hoped to see something that would indicate power tools or machinery, something that would imply that people had forced its discovery. Nothing looked out of the ordinary. It looked like rocks. The cameraman must have played with the angles because it looked much smaller than I'd expected. Stepping into the cave, the hieroglyphs stole my breath. I couldn't believe my eyes. The thought of something so ancient seemed bizarre and out of place. I reminded myself that the country was new, but the land had been around for a long time. I think I'm going to stop there for now. Well, that was most of chapter 1 and 2. It's so hot in here. It's so ungodly hot in here. Thanks for showing up, everybody. I think I'm going to be done for tonight. Bye-bye. Welcome back, everybody. Pick up where I left off yesterday. With a single finger, I traced the outlines, wondering how they'd done it. I tried imagining them carving those grooves with stone. They weren't hieroglyphs like Egyptology. They were closer to cave drawings, with a few repetitive symbols. The pictures told a story, one I didn't understand. The shutter of my camera snapped. Without the sun, the lighting sucked. Even with the flash on, they weren't great quality. After 10 minutes, I'd seen everything. There were poor depictions of people and animals and something that looked like the sun. My mind reeled at all the possibilities. I wondered if it were cavemen or some native tribe. I also tried to wrap my head around what it was they were trying to communicate. To me, it didn't look like they were etched for pleasure. A presence lingered in that cave, something I couldn't put my finger on. While inside, I didn't feel alone, which seemed silly because I could see every wall. I'd never been one to believe in ghosts, but the presence felt like something I'd never experienced before. It felt wrong to turn my back on it, as if it would chase me. The same feeling I got climbing the basement stairs as a kid, as if something were watching, waiting for the right chance to get me. Outside, I paused, taking in the scene. Above was a network of stars that weren't visible in the city. They were beautiful, but the unsettling feeling permeated from the cave. Didn't allow me to stay very long. On my way back through the woods, I couldn't help thinking about the dream I'd had, the calling, the arrows. My headlights cut through the shadows, illuminating the desolate road ahead. On my drive back, I had more questions than answers. The pictures I'd taken with my phone hadn't done it any justice. Daylight would have been much better than the flash. A song played on the radio, one I'd heard 1,000 times but couldn't remember the title or the artist. I tapped my foot, trying to keep rhythm, something I'd never been good at. Trees reached out from the edges of the road, branches like fingers creaking on rusty bones. Even miles away, it felt like those stalking eyes were on me. The lights of a little store caught my eye. I pulled off the road and cut the engine. A young woman stood at the pump, with her head on a swivel. She saw me coming, and I couldn't blame her for being cautious. We made eye contact as I walked toward the store. Upon closer inspection, I saw her high cheekbones and dark complexion. A native girl. Young. Stepping inside the store, I headed for the coolers, where I found a gallon of milk. From there, I got a loaf of bread and some butter. Considering Beverly had been baking, they were easy choices. I also got a little something for myself, a bottle of bourbon. Light music danced through the aisles. Coolers buzzed. A magazine rack stared back at me, covered with the faces of movie stars, headlines depicting scandal after scandal. The cashier hardly batted an eyelash as he scanned my items through and gave me a total. As she popped her gum as I pawed through my wallet in search of cash, which I didn't have enough of, I used my credit card instead. The bell jingled above the door as I stepped back into the cool night air. I didn't recall it jingling when I went in, but sometimes you get used to such things. The girl who'd been at the pump was gone. By the time I pulled into the driveway, all the lights were off, and everyone had settled in for the night. Walking inside, I realized I'd bought all those things for nothing. It didn't matter. I still put everything away and marched up the stairs to sleep myself. Quiet, I got undressed, trying not to wake my wife. That earthy smell seemed stronger, as if it had come into our bedroom on my clothes. Easing into my bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Sleep eluded me. It wasn't until I nearly drifted off to sleep when my eyes shot open in recognition. The smell from the cave matched Felicia. Chapter 3. The following morning I woke up before everyone else, or so I thought. Downstairs, I found Felicia slaving away in the kitchen. "Good morning," she said, with high spirits. "How'd you sleep?" I couldn't tell if she was being genuine or if the insomnia was plastered on my face. "Fine," I muttered. I turned to get the coffee going, only to find that she'd already started the pot. Coffee trickled in the cup. While she wasn't looking, I stared at her for a second, trying to imagine what kind of secrets she might be hiding. In my experience, people who didn't have a presence online did it on purpose. Remembering the conversation I'd had with Nancy, I asked, "Where is it you said you came from again?" The wonderful smell of bacon and eggs rose from the stove, covering the earthy scent. "Well, I came from a military family, so everywhere and nowhere?" If true, that answer would have explained a couple of things. It didn't explain why I hadn't found anything in the paper about her or yearbooks. If I were hiding my identity, I might say something similar. "Ever married?" She shook her head. "What about you?" she asked. "Where are you from?" Clearly she wanted to take some of the heat off herself. Waving my hands around, I said, "Here, born and raised." Steam rolled off my cup. I asked a few more questions, but she didn't give me anything useful. I asked about college, which would have narrowed the search down some, but she hadn't gone. With as little information as we'd found on her, she could have been Amish. Sitting at the table, scrolling through my phone, I tried finding some information on the cave. Nothing came up. The media seemed to have forgotten about it rather quickly. Tapping my fingernail on the table, I searched around. That's when I noticed our 3-tier basket that we kept our fruit in. All the apples had grown mold. I tried to imagine how that was possible. We hadn't had them that long. I pretended not to notice. From the basket, I looked at Felicia, who worked diligently behind the stove. "Did you hear anything about the ruins?" Her head whipped around. "What?" The reaction she'd given me had been the most interesting response of them all. I couldn't squeeze blood from a stone about anything else, but at the mention of the ruins, she flinched. Trying to cover, she said, "Sorry, I'd gone into my own little world." She didn't answer, only began serving plates of scrambled eggs and bacon. By then, my appetite had mostly faded. I scratched some of it with my fork and ate very little. 2 flies circled the rotting fruit, buzzing. The resemblance still bothered me, but being around her made their similarities less obvious. Even identical twins can be told apart, if you know them well enough. With Bobby still in bed and Beverly upstairs, we were alone. She poured herself some coffee and leaned against the counter. I could feel her eyes on me. At first, they didn't make me uncomfortable. Even when I looked up from my plate, she hadn't stopped. If anything, it seemed as if her stare had intensified. It wasn't an ordinary stare. It felt motivated, fueled by something like hunger or maybe desire. I tried pushing the thought from my mind the second it entered. Her dark hair danced as she moved. Unpainted lips kissed the edge of her cup. Slender fingers clutched the handle. Using the mug, she hid a smile. Placing it on the counter, she said, "I'll get the baby up." While she wasn't around, I dumped the food in the trash. Over my shoulder, I glanced at the fruit one last time. The mystery plagued me. Before she came back, I grabbed my briefcase and blazer and slid out. On my drive, a song crossed the radio, one I couldn't quite remember. I'd never been good at music. My ability to focus wavered. Repeatedly, I thought about the rotting fruit. As I pulled into the parking lot, I turned off the engine, and the song died. For a little while, I sat there trying to piece together all my fragments of thoughts. I checked my phone, hoping to have an update from Nancy. Nothing. Sitting behind my desk, unable to work, I couldn't help thinking about that look she'd given me. She'd been staring at me with intent, but I couldn't imagine what. I wasn't vain enough to believe that it was lust, although the thought had crossed my mind. Sitting back in my chair, the thought of those long-ago chess games crossed my mind. I thought about calling Raya. After looking at the clock, I changed my mind. I imagined she'd be in class, and I didn't want to interfere with her academics, not at what they cost per year. For a long time, I stared at my screen, trying to work. I had a couple of meetings, but couldn't keep my focus on anything they were saying. My thoughts trailed in every direction except my case, which I believed I had in the bag anyway. Felicia and the caves were connected. I couldn't explain how, or even how I knew, aside from the smell. By the time lunch rolled around, I hadn't gotten much done. Of the 3 meetings I planned, I missed one with the firm's partners. They didn't hunt me down either. If they noticed my absence at all, I didn't think they'd punish me for it. After lunch, I couldn't bring myself to stay any longer. The hours were there, but the effort wasn't. I wasn't doing myself any favors by staying, so I grabbed my things and left. The same song played on the radio on the way home. I didn't know whether it was because the station played the same 3 songs repeatedly, or because it held a profound meaning I didn't grasp the first time. I doubted that. Unlike the night prior, I drove toward the caves, but didn't commit. Halfway there, I turned around and drove back. Most of the lights were off by the time I pulled into the driveway. I knew I'd been out late, but didn't know how late. When I looked at the clock, it told a different story. It wasn't even 8. Stepping inside, I saw Felicia and the baby, but not Beverly. "Where's Bev?" I asked. Felicia paused, looking up while feeding the baby. "She wasn't feeling well, poor thing. Went to bed early." There were a few viruses roaming around, and it didn't surprise me that much. A couple of guys at the firm had gotten sick. I reached over and took Bobby from her. All her mysteries swirled in my head. I wondered if I was paranoid. Bobby giggled. We played peekaboo on the floor for a little while as the news played. Felicia got up and disappeared. The news anchor said, "Tonight we have a piece on the lottery scam. People who work for the state lottery have been caught tampering with the games. More on that later." Felicia passed by with a basket full of laundry. I considered interrogating her further, but decided against it. I didn't want her to be onto me so early. In my head, tons of unanswered questions festered. A lacy little number fell out of the basket, and she stopped to fetch it from the floor. It didn't belong to Beverly. Uncomfortably, I tried to distance myself from the awkward situation. "Why do you suppose that ruin story fell out of the news so fast?" She looked at me with a strange, concerned look. It disappeared in a flash. What ruin story? I didn't know what I'd seen there, but it wasn't surprise. She'd known something. You know, the ruins they discovered. It was a big story earlier this week. She smiled. "Oh, right. Well, it's an election year. They're going on about the next president. That takes up a lot of airtime and column inches." She let out an uncomfortable laugh and carried on toward the washer. I looked at the TV, saw that they were talking about polling, and rolled my eyes. After that, they talked about celebrity endorsements, which I scoffed at. I'd never liked that concept. It all seemed so phony. Why should anyone care what celebrities have to say about politics? Half of them don't know what they're talking about. The TV went dark with a click. Bobby's eyes had grown heavy. I carried him up the stairs and into the bedroom where Beverly lay completely still. A light snoring hummed. Carefully, I placed him down in the crib. I rubbed his belly, a trick I'd picked up. If he were on the verge of falling asleep, a light rub could get him the rest of the way. Once free of the baby, I wandered out from my room, closing the door with a light click. Down the hall, I slid into my office. I couldn't help staring at the chessboard. thinking my situation wasn't that different from a game of chess. I made moves, she made moves. Part of me wondered if she dropped her lingerie on purpose. As soon as I had that thought, I pushed it out of my head. Those ideas were dangerous. The search for more on Felicia didn't yield any results. I held my head in my hands, disappointed. I couldn't understand how we couldn't find anything. People always leave digital footprints. She wasn't a part of the generation that repelled technology. She likely would have grown up with it, as we had. Scents wafted from the kitchen and danced in my nostrils. I couldn't put my finger on exactly they were, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what they were, but it smelled good. Descending the stairs, I followed that scent into the kitchen. Felicia stood in the front of the stove, stirring something. Trying to be helpful, I gathered a few plates from the cupboard and some silverware. I set the table. While I did, something caught my eye. The ficus that Catherine constantly gave me crap about had wilted. Its leaves were turned down and brown. Someone had tossed out the rotting fruit. In the other room, George cawed, "Your move, your move." It still gave me shivers. "Thanks for setting the table," she said. The stove went off with a click. She began serving dinner. We sat across from one another, not saying much. She had a pleasant, almost knowing smile, although I didn't want to admit it. At times I considered her innocence. Apart from being strange and not having much of a background, she hadn't done anything wrong. The other part that bothered me was how attractive I found her, mostly because she looked like Beverly. I tried not to let that go into my head. Tried to draw barriers there. I couldn't find my wife attractive and not a woman who could pass as her sister. It made me wonder if spouses of twins go through something similar. An image of her in those lacy panties flashed through my mind, and I immediately felt guilt. I got up and rummaged through the cabinets in search of alcohol. I sipped at a glass of red I'd poured for myself, wondering what it was about the ruins that called to me. After deep consideration, I concluded that it was mostly the proximity that interested me. Perhaps it had only been the timing of our new nanny that made her seem connected to them. I met her on the same day. As for the smell, a lot of things smell earthy. She cleared her throat, drawing my attention. "Are you working on any big cases right now?" For a moment, I thought that someone might have hired her to spy on me, but I couldn't imagine who would do such a thing. "There's this case concerning an apartment complex. Rather boring stuff, really." She chewed on her piece of steak. "I don't know that much about litigation. They make it seem interesting on TV. I got that a lot. It's not as nearly as exciting as TV. Most of it's rather boring, paperwork and such. The trials that they play are a very small percent of what I do." For a little while we stared at one another. I took notice of her dark hair and thin face. Despite the difference in her hair color, they were identical. Even her eyes looked like Bev's. I took a deep drink from my glass and considered how we had ended up in our present situation. Once finished with dinner, she gathered up the plates. As she did, she asked if there was anything she could do for me. That also struck me as odd, considering I'd never had someone waiting on me before. "No, that's okay." "Are you sure?" Her eyes sparkled. "I'd do anything for you," emphasizing the anything. The bird cawed. "Wrong move." I looked over my shoulder at George. Peculiar, I thought. Chapter 4. The following morning, things were better. Beverly got out of bed and beat me downstairs. She had some color in her face, but didn't move with the same youthful energy as before. Outside, rain tore from the sky. After getting dressed, I made my way down to the kitchen. Finishing her last gulp of coffee, Beth said, "Felicia and the baby went out for a walk before it started raining. I guess they're soaked now. Make sure he gets dried off and warmed, okay? I can't stick around until I get back. I have a meeting." She gave me a kiss before walking outside. From the window, I watched as she pulled up her hood and ran out into the rain. She took refuge in her car, and before long, she took off. Gilligan came rushing down the hall to the back door. I opened it, and she eagerly ran outside. Somewhere in the distance, a crack of thunder filled the silence. During the 10 times I'd checked my phone, I hadn't once thought to look at the weather. With the ruins gone from the public eye, I tried to find a replacement story. Nothing quite filled that void, though. Bev had cooked a small meal, leaving a few strips of cold bacon and some instant oatmeal behind. I tossed them into the microwave and watched it spin. Another crack of thunder made Gilligan paw at the back door. She walked in after I opened it. She stopped and shook. "Gilligan, couldn't you have done that outside?" Rain plunked on the roof. I sat at the table and stared out the window. After a few minutes, Felicia pushed the stroller up the driveway. Gilligan heard the knob on the front door and ran down the hall, where she again disappeared into my office. Coming in, shaking off the cold, Felicia muttered, "I should have checked the weather this morning." This made me chuckle because I hadn't either. I got up from the table and stepped closer to them. She handed me the baby. He wasn't as wet as I'd expected, probably because he'd been under the stroller's hood. Felicia, on the other hand, was soaked. "Oh no," she said. "All my clothes are in the washer." Not thinking much of it, I said, "Oh, just help yourself to whatever Bev has until yours are dry." I turned to the linen closet and fetched a towel for Bobby. He fussed a bit, looked as if he were about to cry, but yawned instead. He didn't struggle much when I changed the diaper either. When Felicia returned, my knees nearly buckled. Of all the things she could have chosen, she'd gotten into one of Beverly's lacy slips. My eyes nearly fell out from my head as I tried not to stare. My thoughts scattered, and I tried to regain my focus. To see my wife again, in her prime, I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear my thoughts. I hope she won't mind. I just grabbed something easy. The word easy had a strange inflection on it. I tried not to think about that either. She could have gotten sweatpants or leggings. She could have worn her jeans because they were nearly the same size. Rubbing my temples, I could only think about getting out of there. If Bev were to find me in a room with her dressed like that, I'd be in trouble. I considered talking to her about it being inappropriate, but thought it wasn't my place to dictate what she wore. It would only happen once. Her clothes were in the dryer, after all. Rather than confronting her, I headed off to my office. I didn't want to look at her. Didn't want to investigate the curves the slip had formed around her figure. The thoughts danced around in my head, but I forced it out. As I walked by, I saw something on her back, just above her shoulder blade. A tattoo. I didn't get a great look at it, but it made me think of Chinese or Japanese symbols. Peace, hope, prosperity, whatever. That wasn't it. I didn't think it was an Asian language. Walking down the hall, I remembered something. Last night, she'd been moving a load of her laundry. She'd already done it. Her clothes had already been washed, which only meant one thing. Following Gilligan's example, I hid behind my office door alongside the wet Labrador and sighed with relief. Like a thorn in my brain, the tattoo persisted. It looked familiar. It wasn't until I'd sat down at my desk and flipped through the cave pictures that I suspected what the symbol might be. At first, I didn't believe it. I couldn't allow myself to think of such preposterous ideas. Except it kept returning. The problem was I didn't get a great look at it. I'd only seen it in passing. Part of me wanted to get a picture of it so I could compare them. The longer I thought about it, the less I believed it was another language. I'd convinced myself that it was one of the symbols drawn on the cave walls. Trying to distract myself, I stared at some flies on my screen. I couldn't help thinking about the slip, in part because she'd taken me by surprise, and because I wanted to understand her motive. A part of me wondered if I could get a better look at her tattoo without putting myself in a compromising situation. I considered asking her about it too, bringing it up in casual conversation, but without any myself, I didn't know how I'd broach the subject. Catherine had a couple of butterflies on her ankle, but I didn't know if that would be enough to start a conversation. By the time I'd gone back downstairs, she'd found some other clothes. Shortly after that, Bev came through the door, and I wrapped her in the biggest hug. I could tell by the look on her face and the way she held her shoulders that she'd had a horrible day. "I think I'm going to bed," she groaned. "I still feel awful." I followed her upstairs, prepared to do anything she needed. She didn't go straight to bed. Instead, she detoured to the bathroom. I stopped before the doorway, allowing her some privacy. Shortly after that, the shower began running, and I went to the closet to fetch a robe. Steam covered the mirror. Her clothes were in a puddle on the floor. Ordinarily, this would have been a great scene for me. Under the current circumstances, it wasn't as exciting. The last thing I wanted to do was approach her with romantic intent, especially when she didn't feel well. I placed the robe on the hook. Thanks, she said. If I still feel like this tomorrow, I'll have to call out. I agreed, helped her into the shower, and then stepped out. How's she doing? Felicia's voice came from nowhere, startling me. I hadn't noticed her there. Oh, she's going to bed early. Still struggling. She nodded. Sorry to hear it. If there's anything I can do, let me know. Lying on the bed, fully dressed, I waited for her. She took a long time. I anticipated helping her again, but before long my eyes grew heavy, and the Sandman came. The limbs of elder trees cracked on hollow bones, their fingers clawed in the dark. Every step took me further into the strange forest. Howls sounded from the distance, wolves or coyotes. Beneath me the ground trembled, splitting a line of earth between my feet. Fire bubbled from below, red-hot lava that flowed from the crevice, scorching everything in its path. I ran as far and as fast as I could, but the embers carried. They closed the distance on me. From the flames came an unscorched hand. A woman's hand. I woke with a start. Even in the dark, I knew Beverly had already climbed in bed beside me. Her gentle purr filled the silence. Burdened by the dream, I couldn't fall back asleep. For a long time, I stared at the ceiling, hoping it would dissipate like most nightmares do. I must have fallen back asleep because Beverly had made it to the toilet without me noticing. The retching that followed concerned me.